Welcome to Bookswell Intersections. I'm your host, Cody Sisco. Today, my guest is Jessamyn Violet. Jessamyn is a writer and musician based in Venice Beach. Originally from Boston, she has a BFA from Emerson College and an MFA in creative writing from California College of the Arts. She has published a book of poetry called Organ Thieves by Gauze PDF in 2017, as well as short fiction in Plowshares and More. Her debut novel, Secret Rules to Being a Rockstar, was published in 2023, and she's also the drummer for the band Movie Club. Welcome, Jessamyn.
Thanks for having me, Cody.
Yeah, we met last year, toward the end of the year, at the WeHo Reads Literary Deathmatch event, and your reading from Secret Rules to Being a Rockstar had all of the atmosphere and attitude and the guitar accompaniment. It was really a highlight in the evening in the way that it embodied a rock star aesthetic.
Thank you. I was very excited that Adrian let me play with the format a little bit.
It was a lot of fun. So how did you come to view the rock star life as something that needed rules? And how did you learn them?
That's a really good question. I think, for me, I've always grappled with the hardest part about the artistic path in general is that there is so much uncertainty and you're constantly hearing contradictory advice and you really just never know. And it would help if there were rules. There are a lot of other career paths that have set things that you can and cannot do. But art and creativity in general is all about bending and breaking rules to make any impact. And the experimental nature of that is something that I think a lot of people get lost along the way with. So what was funny to me was, back before I was even in a band or anything, my friend and I were, she always called me a rock star, even though I wasn't actively in bands. And we would write these rules, about what it took to be a rock star. And they were just kind of inside jokes at first. But then I realized what they were doing was making me feel okay about my alternative lifestyle, and that rock stars and artists in general do have to live by a different set of rules from most of society. And you get hated for that. You get looked down on for that. You get, you get taught to feel shame about that. There are so many things that kind of, you have to constantly, it's the mental gymnastics behind just managing the path are, if you could put it, if you could do a, a gymnastics plot, it would be very interesting to me if you could physically manifest, the gymnastics that you have to do in your head to feel okay. If you're at all, I kind of envy sometimes the people that are just completely free. But I am from a family of not artists, and it always felt like I was kind of doing things wrong. And anyway, so when I sat down to write this book, in a lot of ways, it was an exploration of a different route that I could have chosen growing up. It takes place in the 90s, and I just kind of decided that rules, putting these things that, I've learned one way or another, or, that aren't necessarily even true, but are told to you along the way as advice. It was a fun way to structure the book because coming of age as an artist is incredibly difficult. And
it seems like there's some similarities in terms of being a musician or being a writer, for example, where you have to have this confidence and ego to even begin to put your stuff out there and to create and expect that it's good enough that people will enjoy it. but then you
Yes.
also have to be so self-critical in order to forge the writing or the songs into something that's, you know, that's meaningful and that lasts. And it's this duality of back and forth that I think is really interesting to the creative process.
Absolutely. Like I think overcoming the fear is definitely the hardest part. You get so stuck in your head when you are, not able to release your art, and when you are, and both are equally painful in different
Mm,
ways. You know what I mean? Because when you're unable to get someone to release your art, you have to decide, like, do I put it out myself, or that doesn't feel right? Like, I need someone to be like putting their stamp of legitimacy on this, but then
right.
the amount of rejection is it's almost insufferable. For many, it is insufferable, and they
Yeah.
can't see it through to the end. I, am myself, just I've gone back and forth. It took me a very long time to get my first book published, and it was a very windy road. So anyway, and
Mm,
then when you finally do have a book coming out, you have to manage your expectations. You have to be like scared and excited, and just like trying to be cool in the middle of it, because the things that you imagine could happen are very far from what ends up happening. So
yeah.
it's just weird.
Yeah, there's a moment in the book where the main character Kyla Bell she's really going through it. So she's moved to Hollywood to have a stab at like her dreams coming true as a keyboardist for this band,
Mm-hmm.
and everything's difficult because she's 18 and she's in the middle of this life that is so foreign to her. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's this moment where she finally gets back in front of the piano for the first time in a while, and kind of starts to work her way towards like herself or who she was, and her hope again about what she wants for her career. What do you think it is about music that allows someone to do that?
Well, I think it's lucky if music allows you to do that. You have to forge a very special connection with it, and the process has to be enough. Like, if you can find a way to incorporate all your influences into your own unique style that makes you feel like you can see yourself outside of yourself for a moment, that's
Mm,
just so grounding. And when everything is going wrong, and when you feel like you don't know who you are anymore, if you can go to your instrument and touch it and kind of reconnect with this place that you've forged with the instrument, um, it can save you in a lot of ways from completely,
mm,
giving up hope, or just this level of depression that comes when you get stretched too far outside your own self. You have trouble getting back in. So I think
yeah.
that the coolest thing that Kyla learns is, um, and that we all have to learn, is that all these experiences, even when they're painful, they do add depth to our ability to create. And while we can like go back and play songs that we wrote as a different person or in a different time, you know, the advancement is happening when you're living life. and
Mm,
and that's a part that I think a lot of artists do get also caught up in. It's like, you have to be out there living life and to have a certain level of depth to your art, I think. There's a certain amount you have to love other people and put time into other people and relationships, and put
mm,
yourself out there and get humiliated, or get
yeah.
a little
Yeah.
roughed up.
A little roughed
Kyla
up.
gets
Yeah.
roughed up, yeah. But
There was one of the rules that you mentioned at Literary Deathmatch, but also comes in the form of advice from one of the sort of mentor characters to Kyla, is advice to not date actors or musicians because they are entirely too egotistical. They need to be everywhere, and they need everybody to be in love with them.
yeah, that I'm obviously, it's a little tongue in cheek. And I think in coming to LA, I was told that advice by someone in right off the bat, like date people on the other side of the camera. Sometimes I did. I mean, it's not like I had like I was never strictly, one side of the camera or the other, but I think, obviously it really depends on the person. Like every artist is different, and I married a musician. So where does that leave me? I'm a musician. I'm a writer. I mean, writers are, very, very hard to be with.
Yeah.
And I can say that as a writer, it's like,
they say know the rules in order to know when to break them too.
Right. Exactly. So it was kind of, a lot of this book was just kind of a reflection of my own coming of age, in LA, and the kind of levels of advice. It's by no means autobiographical, but I did incorporate a lot of choice expressions that, get stuck in your head along the way. You're just like, wow, that's really something. And I want people to have visceral reactions to them. And I want, cause they're not right. Like I was, fed a lot of bad advice along the way. It's like, people just like to think they're experts here on various subjects.
I mean, Kyla, I had anxiety while I was reading it because Kyla didn't eat for days when she first arrived in Hollywood. Oh no, that's recipe for a breakdown.
She was forced into an ultra slim fast diet, basically, which was not autobiographical, but in the 90s, I think more than maybe any other time, but I'm not sure because, women used to wear those corsets that they literally couldn't breathe in.
But it was the era of heroin chic, and
it was the era of
really unrealistic beauty standards. And it seemed
I was responding to some of that because, that was me growing up, and, I battled with different eating disorders and luckily never fell too far in, but I think it was near impossible to get through the 90s as a female without at least dabbling in eating disorders, because it was and it was the pressure. There was literally slim fast. You'd bring it to school so you wouldn't eat the cafeteria food. I mean, it's so crazy to me how much women fixate on their weight, how we're taught to, and it's such a distraction from being the healthy, strong versions of ourselves that we could be. I mean, I think back to when I was busy obsessing about the way I looked, and it was there were so many other things I could have been doing. And I just think, that in some ways it is a better world, and in some ways it's just as bad these days, back then. And at one point someone asked Kyla, can you name one female musician who looks like they eat? It's and she can't, and she feels like a traitor for not being able to, but it's a moment where it was I just wanted to make that point that in the 90s, we didn't even have any shred of body positivity going on, and, or, it was all heroin chic white girls pretty much.
Yeah.
And, it was just something that I am glad that now I feel like any teenager, if they look, they can find a celebrated person that looks like them, and that's
different now.
It's so different. And they do say, all the filters and social media are terrible, and that is true. I can't even imagine. And I'm so grateful for the generation I was born into, just because we didn't have to deal with that growing up. We didn't have to deal with social media, but we did have to deal with the lack of diversity in different types of bodies and in nationalities represented across the board.
Gatekeeping and all that. Yeah.
So much gatekeeping. And, I mean, when you watch old 90s movies, the way they treat women is unbelievable.
Really? Yeah.
You can't even believe that you used to just laugh and it wouldn't even occur to you. Like that's the craziest part of like looking back at some of the stuff that you used to.
Yeah. So one of the best reimaginings in this book is I think the queer element,
Yeah.
where Kyla's like exploring her feelings. You know, she's from the Northeast and was sort of closeted about her attraction to women then, but she comes to Hollywood and she finds like, oh, I'm having all of sorts of different attraction to women, attraction to men, and it's she's as a rock star free to explore those. There's a, I think one of my favorite moments is the you know, she's on a date with this really famous guy who's like totally hot and she's into him, but then she gets pulled into a coat check with a woman and has like a really fun experience there too.
Yeah, that was a really fun scene to write. Yeah, I think, you know, the one of the best parts about Kyla's uprooting and being kind of thrown into the giant playpen of LA is that she does feel like anonymous enough to kind of reinvent herself and go in different directions and not feel like she has to define herself. Like in a small town, in a small high school, you do feel like you're just like defined to the point of like, you know, you're just like squashed in this like one thing, you know, and so while it is scary and it does corrupt her in a lot of ways, there are moments where she gets to feel more like close to finding out who she is than she ever could back home. And I also think that in general, there are not enough. I wanted it to be like, it's about, you know, attraction really is on a person to person basis more than anything else. And I don't think there are enough books that explore that kind of pansexuality, which wasn't even a term when I was growing up, but I guess I would have used it because that's how I operate. I'm completely driven by someone's character more than appearance or
and
anything.
the term sapiosexual, right? So it's the interaction. Yeah. Do you have so I'm thinking about all the glam and exuberance, but also the chemicals and the come downs throughout the course of the book that kind of surround the rock star life. Do you have a favorite or a worst party moment in the book?
Favorite or worst?
Or both?
I really love the movie premiere that she goes to with her bandmate Stardust when Ruby's not around. I did, you know, a lot of people when they read it up front, they were like, oh, it's just like it's party after party. And I'm like, but that is LA. Like if
you get into that slipstream.
Yeah. When you're young, LA is like, you have a hard time staying in one night of the week, you know, like there's literally always something to do. And yeah, and especially when you're Kyla, who's plugged into all these like successful musicians who, I mean, that's part of the gig as musicians. You have to go party, you know, like, so she has to figure out how to handle it. And so I did have a lot of fun with the party scenes in the book. I even ended up like removing some because it was like too many parties, but that was like the point, you know, it was like supposed to mirror the overwhelm of being in LA when you're young and social. And but I loved the movie premiere scene where they stage crash. I did model the movie premiere after I went to the Simpsons movie premiere.
Okay.
And it was like just the most insane party I had ever seen.
Wow.
So that was the inspiration behind it. And you know, I also think it's kind of fun when they're doing the pie throwing party, you know, and then she ends up in the closet literally with Ruby Sky.
Yeah.
I guess, but that's also like a painful moment. Like that's maybe like the worst party scene. But I have always like wanted to stage crash. I just think it's so fun. The idea of just like getting up and just like playing, you know, with no one knowing kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not really possible. Like usually the equipment's turned off. The sound guy is not like letting the microphones roll through
But,
the
maybe
band
a
break.
rock star can slip the guy a 50 and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's happened, and yeah, many a setting, but most of the time it is pretty impossible. But
so there was one quote in the book where I felt like you like had reached into my soul and kind of exposed it a little bit, and I want to share that and hear more about where you were coming from. I think it's a moment when Kyla's feeling like her life is amazing and it's taking off and it's awesome, but then there's also this other side to it. So you write, witnessing high points like this without any witnesses was like being trapped in your own good dream. No one I knew would ever understand how it felt. Suddenly, I felt lonely again.
Yeah. It's kind of just, you know, it's a funny dual set of emotions that you get when you are reaching new heights, like experience wise and socially and artistically, and you're young and you feel like suddenly your friends are not like, because you're used to sharing your experiences with your best friends or whatever, and it's like I just remember that feeling so clearly of my own, you know, where it's like, oh man, like they're missing it, you know, but it makes you more of an individual. But that is like a childhood thing when you have a bestie and you try to experience everything together. It just like makes it better to share the moments, you know, like you feel a closeness that you can't feel if you go out on your own and you're forging your own new path and you're having all these new experiences. So that was what I was trying to kind of encapsulate there, like that emotion of growing, but feeling sad at the same time that you're kind of like not able to be as close with the people that you used to share everything with because you're growing.
Yeah. Jessamyn, thank you for discussing secret rules to being a rock star.
Thank you so much for having me.
Everyone can find Jessamyn online, JessamynViolet.com. Thank you.